they all the same, or?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Okay. I'll make some comment on. Thank you.
Someone's printer got hammering.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want me to take them away, or do you want to keep it?
Just leave them there now. Okay, thank you and welcome to the Integrated Care Board meeting of Cheshire and Merseyside. And let me just start off with a few words of welcome to our members of the public. I am really, really pleased that you're here, because it's hugely important to this board, to me, that you hear what's going on here. And there's a few things that I just want to say. Firstly, I'm going to make a comment on receiving this petition. And so somebody did give us, the advance warning that our people are going to hand us a petition. And there's volumes here, so we look forward to reading that. It could be that some of the questions that are posed or that led to the petition are answered in today's meeting. Great if they are. If they're not, you have my assurance that Graham and the management team will be going through this petition and ensuring that we do respond to it appropriately. It could be by the next board meeting. So thank you for this petition. It's really important that we hear what you had to say. I give you that assurance again that we will carefully look at this petition and respond to it appropriately. Can I just remind you a couple of things. One is that this is a public meeting, but we request that members of the public observe the meeting, but please don't interrupt as we go along. And for those of you who are happy to stay at the end, a number of us will be around to come and have a chat with you at the end of the board meeting. A colleague has just handed me some questions. And for this board meeting, we've had over 30 questions coming to the organisation here. We won't be able to answer those questions today in this formal meeting. We'll need to go through them and appropriately answer them, and the responses will be put up on our website. I know I say that every meeting, and I know that some of the questions that were posed to the board in November are yet to be answered, and I sincerely apologise for that. They should have been answered in good time, but we will ensure that we respond to these questions in really good time. The final thing is just a bit about the logistics of this room. It's not a great room. I'm going to remind all board members who are speaking, use the microphones, speak directly into them. And if I could ask gentlemen at the back, if you can't hear, will you wave and I'll jivvy people along? Okay, thank you. So, can I start off with any apologies? Received an apology from John Wirral. Thank you. And any declarations of interest from members of the board pertinent to the agenda? None. Thank you. Ooh. Sorry, Jan.
Thanks, Reg. I've recently been appointed as the Executive Director for Strategy at Liverpool University Hospitals Trust, so I will have to declare an interest in the item later on the agenda.
Thank you, Jan. So, let's go around the table and introduce ourselves. Should we start at...
Good morning, everybody. My name is Lorna Quigley. I'm the Associate Director of Quality and Safety Improvement. I'm based here in Wirral, and today I'm here to talk through the resident story.
Thank you. Jan? Introduce yourself again.
Sorry, Jan Ledward, Place Director, Liverpool.
Thanks.
Karen Livesey, Wirral CVS.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Anthony Middleton. I'm the Director of Performance and Planning at NHS Cheshire and Merseyside ICB.
Good morning everybody. I'm Adam Irvine. I'm a Primary Care Partner Member from Community Pharmacy.
Good morning, I'm Claire Watson. I'm the Assistant Chief Executive at the ICB.
Good morning, I'm Joe Rafferty. I'm Chief Executive of Merseycare, NHS Trust and Partner Member for the Mental Health Community and Learning Disability Provider Collaborative.
I'm Dr Naomi Rankin. I'm the primary care partner member, soon to be appointed.
Good morning, Tony Foy, Non-Exec Director.
Good morning, I'm Fiona Lemons. I'm Deputy Medical Director.
Hello, I'm Chris Douglas. I'm the Director of Nursing and Care.
Good morning, I'm Simon Banks. I'm Place Director for Wirral.
Morning, I'm Louise Merton. I'm Corporate Services Governance Manager at the ICB.
I'm Raj Jain, Chair.
Graham Irwin, Chief Executive.
Good morning, Erica Morris, Non-Exec Director.
Steve Brimmer, Chief Executive of Warrington Borough Council, representing the interests of the councils.
Good morning, I'm Rowan Pritchard-James, the Medical Director of NHS Cheshire and Merseyside.
Good morning, I'm Maura, I'm the Chief Executive of St Helens and Knowsley and Southport and Ormskirk Hospitals. I am the leader of the Cheshire and Merseyside Acute Provider Collaborative and a partner member of the board.
Good morning, I'm Neil Large, Non-Executive Director.
Hello, I'm Claire Wilson. I'm the Finance Director for the Integrated Care Board.
Hello everybody, I'm Councillor Paul Cummins. I'm Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care for Sefton and I'm a partner member for local government.
Hi, I'm Warren Eskdale. I'm the Chief Executive of Voluntary Sector North West and I'm here representing the voluntary community, faith and social enterprise groups across Cheshire and Merseyside.
Hello, I'm Sarah Thwaites from Health Watch Liverpool, here on behalf of the 9 Health Watches in Cheshire and Mersey today.
Good morning, I'm Ian Ashworth, Director of Public Health for Cheshire, West and Chester and the Public Health Representative here today.
Thank you. Can we go to agenda item 3, which are the minutes of the previous meeting? Can I have any comments or corrections before I seek? Chris?
Just one on the bottom of page 8, which says that positive actions taken today include the new post of a Cheshire and Mersey employment lead. That should read a retention lead. And then the action at the end of that item, it says request a report was presented in January to describe if and how arrangements have been successful. Obviously that's a future date and it's about the outputs from that retention work.
Thank you, Chris. Any other comments, corrections before I seek your approval? So given that correction, people happy to approve these minutes? A yes would be good. Okay, thank you. Can I move to the board action log? It's here for noting. Any comments or updates on the action log? No, I'll take them. It's been accurate. And the board decision log, again, any comments? No, so we'll take those as being accurate. So let's move to agenda item 6, the report of the Chief Executive.
Chair, thank you very much. As usual, I'm not going to talk to every item of this report. I'm just going to highlight 2 or 3 areas that I want to discuss today, but again, happy that myself or other directors will answer questions on all of the items contained therein. The first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to reflect on the NHS over Christmas. I'm really clear that the NHS over Christmas did not offer the quality of service or the access or that any of us should feel comfortable with. There's been a conflation of events this year. The latest wave of COVID infections and seasonal flu this year both peaked between Christmas and the New Year. That taken together with the fact that unusually this year less patients than normal were discharged pre-Christmas. So our hospitals went into that Christmas period in a particularly challenged situation in terms of the availability of beds to admit patients. The consequence of that is a number of our hospitals were delivering care to patients on corridors, and patients took longer than normal if they were being admitted to be admitted to a hospital bed. Now, the reasons for this are multifactorial, and we have concentrated very significantly on addressing both the immediate quality and safety concerns, but also looking at flow through the system. because quite frankly the ability to admit the next patient to a hospital bed is dependent upon successfully discharging those people who are already in those hospital beds and are ready to move on back to home or another care setting. Cheshire and Merseyside has one of the poorest statistics for the number of people who remain in a hospital bed who are ready to be discharged. And therefore, we've had a great focus upon this. We received an additional £29 million of funding from the government's initially announced £500 million to address this issue. And then subsequently announced in January, we received a further £9 million from the second tranche of £200 million that the government announced to release for improving flow through the system. Issues, however, are quite complex. Just because we've given the money doesn't mean to say that the capacity is there in either the care sector or care home sectors to support and respond to this. And we work very closely with each of our 9 local authorities to increase the speed at which we're able to discharge patients who are ready to leave. Now, what I can report is the situation is much improved during January, but we should be still very clear that on Monday of this week, 4 of the hospitals across Cheshire and Merseyside were still resorting to providing care for patients on corridors rather than in distinct A&E hospital bays or on the wards. So we're not out of the woods, and we continue to work very hard on this, and the key action is to keep focusing on flow and keep focusing on the effective discharge of patients from hospital. I wanted to turn now to a paragraph on industrial action. I perhaps couldn't say more in writing at this point in time, but one of the things that I wanted to share with you is that on the most recent day of industrial action, and in particular I'm referring to the ambulance strike on the 23rd of January, we had a 6% reduction in attendances at all A&E departments in aggregate across the system. And that says to me that there is still a change in the public's behaviour that happens on the day of strikes, a change in public behaviour which I think indicates a degree of support for the NHS and for the staff taking that industrial action. What we do is we kind of look a bit more deeply into this, and we check and that we see that on those days there was a much higher conversion rate from those patients actually attending A&E into hospital beds. And whilst this isn't perfect reassurance, it does reassure me that the right patients were still getting ambulances, the right patients were still getting to hospital, and the right patients were getting the treatment that they required. But it remains a very difficult and challenged period, and in one of the appendices to this report, we've put just a little piece of information there showing the extent, as we understand it, of the future strike action that will take place in Cheshire and Merseyside. And I just wanted to highlight for you the 6th of February. And I'm going to choose my words carefully here, just to illustrate a point. But there are more organisations within our footprint, i.e. Cheshire and Merseyside, who will be taking strike action on the 6th of February, than will be taking strike action in any other region of England. So there are more organisations taking strike action in Cheshire and Merseyside on the 6th of February than in the whole of London on the 6th of February, than in the whole of the South East on the 6th of February. So we have to recognise that there is a significant impact on the delivery of health services, but you've heard me say it here before, we continue to respect our staff's rights to engage in this legal strike action, and we continue to make sure that we work closely with the trade unions so that emergency services are covered on those days and that we can keep services safe for our population. There's a number of items otherwise of update in this report, but I just wanted to highlight people very quickly to item 6. We published significant details of our staffing structures all the way down to individual posts on our website on the 6th of January. This was a direct request from the Department of Health to undertake this. We have published this information even though we are still midway through a review of how we arrange and staff certain structures. But again, something that the Department of Health wanted all ICBs to do for reasons of good governance and transparency. And finally, whilst I'm not going to talk about it, I've attached in appendices a very interesting infographic that was prepared by North West Ambulance Service, just to give the size and the scale of how the North West Ambulance Service is supporting not only the people of Cheshire and Merseyside, but all of those people across their footprint. Leave it there, Chair.
Thank you, Graham. Any questions or comments? Fiona?
Thank you, Chair.
You're going to have to put your hand up high so I can see.
Thank you, Chair. Just on Section 5, the harmonising clinical commissioning policies update, just to be really, really clear, it says in Section 5.6 that the Quality and Performance Committee approved 56 policies to harmonise. Further evidence had come out just before that, so it was only 54. So it will be 54 that will go onto the website. And also, just in Section 5.9, we need to approve the legal statement, so it can be go on the website as well, please.
Thank you. So 54 rather than 56, and seeking the board's approval for the legal statement. Can I have that approval or not? Yes, thank you. Steve?
Just a comment on the Social Care Discharge Fund. I think you moved swiftly to get that money allocated out to the 9 local systems that we have here. Unfortunately, the amount of money doesn't even touch the size in terms of the demand, because adult social care is still inadequately funded, and that's despite promises made by the previous Prime Ministers many, many years ago. And what is happening is it's actually increasing demand and increasing cost as the care home community changes its behaviour in relation to the new markets that can be created by this additional money. So whilst I welcome what you've done with this, it really is a sticking plaster on a much bigger issue that needs to be resolved by government in terms of funding adult social care in an adequate and proper way. I do hope as well, once we've got through the winter pressures, we can have a proper discussion either here or the Healthcare Partnership about investment in prevention and investment in admissions avoidance, keeping people away from hospital so we don't have those sort of issues of log jams perhaps next year that we've had this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Graham, did you want to make a comment on that?
One of the things that Anthony will arrange for us is a full winter debrief when the time is appropriate. We're still in it at the moment, but I do think what Steve says is really important. You know, we need to forward plan. We need to find a better way to use this money. I accept the points that Steve makes about this money as a sticking plaster. Of the first 500 million that the government gave and, well, announced in November, we know that around that money becomes 600 million in the new financial year, and we know that's recurrently available and grows again in 24-25. Now, the fact that we had 500 million for this winter and they've given us 600 million for the whole of next year already tells you that there's an imbalance in those figures, but the fact that we know now does mean that we can plan better.
Thank you, Graham. And the point on prevention, Steve, why don't we go to that when we look at the draft Health and Care Partnership strategy? So I think I've got Paul, Sarah, and then Rowan.
Thanks, Chair. The solutions to the problems facing social care aren't limited to finance, but certainly short-term one-off finance is not helpful to us to sort the problems out. We've got massive shortages in staff, and a lot of authorities like mine, we can't afford to pay staff properly either, which we're not going to be able to attract people into the profession and train them and get quality delivery unless we have the right level of cash as well. But it's more fundamental about organisation and reorganisation. And again, the government's proposals, which they've now shelved yet again, don't even touch the surface of what's needed with these issues. But we need to be in discussions together, local government and the NHS, to look at long-term solutions.
Thank you, Paul. Sorry.
It's a point about the pressures in corridor care. So we've been, as the various different health watches, in quite a lot of the A&Es in the December period, speaking to people in the corridor. For example, I was in the corridor, loved talking to patients, and it's definitely a hugely difficult situation for patients and their families. But the one thing that it's a horrible situation that it shouldn't be happening is the praise that patients' family members generally had for staff, the huge efforts they were going to keep people as safe as possible in very difficult situations, and not to underestimate the pressures on staff when you're delivering care in those situations. So obviously we all want to see situations improving so we don't see that corridor in care in future, but just to pay tribute to the staff that were doing their absolute best in horrendous situations.
Thank you for that point, really well made. Thank you. Rowan?
Thank you, and it's a shame Steve's just momentarily stepped out, but coming back to this idea of the preventative work, it's something that the system and from our medical director, we are determined to address. And I think one of the key steps to that was the work on our informatics strategy, this whole approach of the health intelligence that we have being turned into action for these patients. Already we're starting to identify some of the most vulnerable patients out there and how we can avoid those admissions. We already have new areas like virtual wards, which will be heading towards over 500 beds for our system in the weeks that follow. And whilst most of the time now we use those to step patients down from hospital, as our clinicians become more and more confident with them, the huge opportunity is to avoid those admissions in the first place, not just keep patients safely at home, but safely active at home, because the huge risk is deconditioning when patients then come into hospital and don't have to make their own cup of tea and head up and downstairs and that sort of thing. So that will continue to be a very core piece of business for us to get the preventative work to the very best place it can be. Thanks.
Thank you, Rowan. Some optimism there, which is really good to hear, given the pressures on the system. As we've just heard, the need for a long-term investment plan for social care. Graham, I'm not going to attempt to sum up it. Are we happy to move on to the next agenda item? Thank you. So Simon, welcome. And Simon Banks is going to do the report of the Wirral Place.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just waiting. Need to switch the laptop on that's driving the presentation. Okay. So while Louise is doing that, welcome to Wirral, those of you who are not Wirral residents or don't work in Wirral. This presentation is in the packs that have been circulated as part of the board papers. So I'm hoping that we can give you a flavour beyond what's actually already in there. So that's good, and I think I have the clicker, Louise. Let's just check. Excellent. So we're going to go through a little bit about our Wirral Place, our context, what guides us, how we work together, what we're working on, and also then Frankie's story, which is a local young person who we asked to come today, but obviously it's quite an intimidating atmosphere to share your own story, but they were very, very happy for Lorna to share that with us today. So our Wirral Place, and an infographic on the side, population of 323,000, 5 primary care networks, 47 general practices, which is 5 less than when I arrived 5 years ago, and then beyond that, about 24 dental practices, around 82 community pharmacists, optometrists as well within our system, who also provide primary care services alongside our 48 general practices in the borough. One acute trust, one community trust, one mental health trust, and I haven't put a number against the voluntary community faith sector because actually there's over about 1,400. It grows and wanes, and Karen has been a very important partner in working with the voluntary sector over the last few years. One local authority, 22 wards, and currently 4 parliamentary constituencies, as replicated on that map. So Wirral is a very diverse and distinctive place. It has 50 miles long, 7 miles wide, and as you can see out there, is bound by the River Mersey, the Irish Sea, and it's an absolutely fantastic place to be, walking along the front at New Brighton and driving down in the mornings. It has a population of about 48% male, 51% female. That population is set to grow, and has contributed a lot to the world in terms of camel-led shipbuilding. New York Central Park, Birkenhead Park is the blueprint for Central Park in New York. Lady Lever and Williamson Art Galleries, Port Sunlight, the Open Golf Championship, Paul Hollywood, the Coral, Half Man, Half Biscuit. A number of famous people from Wirral have contributed to the cultural, social, industrial life of not just this peninsula, the region and beyond. So it is a great place to live, it's a great place to work and to do business, but not for everybody, unfortunately, and I think we'll come on to that in the next section about our context. And a lot of this is this information is available on the Wirral Intelligence Service website in the State of the Borough report. But this infographic on the on the east-hand side, absolutely sort of follows the Merseyrail line up the east side, and indeed across the north and west of our peninsula. And what it really demonstrates is that that life expectancy, there is significant life expectancy variation in our borough. It maps it towards and demonstrates very clearly, I think, that challenge we're facing of the differentials in life expectancy, and that very much focused around areas of economic and social deprivation. And life expectancy has worsened in recent years, is lower than England average. Men in Wirral can expect to live to the age of 78 and females to 82. But a child born in Greasby today will live 12 years longer than a child born in Tranmere. And about 18 years of the lives of people in Wirral are spent in poor health. And I think the life course approach shows that there about where our challenges are, and again it's in the packs, but basically 1 in 4 people will die from cancer in Wirral. 1 in 5 have circulatory problems such as heart disease, and it's the second highest cause of death in our borough. And 50% of people who are out of work because they have a mental health condition. So we have a significant amount of work to do with a significant proportion of our borough and people who live here. And what we call our tartan rug, the wards across the top that have a red ring around are our most deprived wards. And 1 in 3 people live in areas reported as 20% of the most deprived in England. 1 in 3 adults of working age in those most deprived areas are claiming work benefits, and 22% earn below the real living wage, and that's down from 30% back in 2018. The last figures we had for fuel poverty were 2020, where 1 in 7 households were in fuel poverty, but Biddenston and St James, which is again ringed up there, it was 1 in 4. Now, I said that's based on 2020 figures. I think if we do and I know Public Health, Wirral Information Service are doing an update of that now, but I think that will be a significantly worsened situation when that is reported. So what guides us, apart from, obviously that need to move on health inequalities? Well, as Wirral, as a place, under the leadership of the local authority, Wirral Council, a Wirral plan for 5-year plan has been developed and was almost already in situ when NHS Cheshire and Merseyside was created as an integrated care board. But 5 guiding principles about a sustainable environment, brighter futures, particularly for children and young people, an inclusive economy, so actually getting people into meaningful employment and retaining them in meaningful employment and growing our economic base. Having safe and pleasant communities where residents feel safe and are proud to live. And there is a very, very strong and active community spirit in Wirral, as my colleagues will attest to. But also making sure people have active and happy lives. So as NHS Cheshire and Merseyside, we weren't engaging with Wirral with a blank piece of paper. We had quite a bit of engagement work prior to the formal establishment of this organisation back in July of last year. So our job then within health and care, bearing in mind we hear a lot about health and care's contribution, the wider determinants of health, our job to make sure we augmented, aligned and integrated with that Wirral plan in what we did. So actually we do affect the key terms of health as well as the key determinants of health affecting health and care. So as a Wirral system, as system leaders with the chairs of our provider organisations, with the voluntary sector, with the chief execs of those organisations as well, we developed some core principles which are said are in your pack that align not only to what we're trying to achieve with the Wirral plan, but what as an integrated care system we are trying to achieve. So they are around maximising the use of our resources for the benefit of people of Wirral, reducing health inequalities, focusing on well-being and prevention, making sure the services are started to organise around the person and we make it easier for people to access those services, but also maintaining people's personal independence in doing so and keeping those services close to home and being organisationally agnostic about how they're delivered. So who is the best organisation to deliver it, but also how do they link in with the other organisations within the system across the sectors. So how do we work together? Well, this was our target operating model as a system that we set up prior to NHS Cheshire and Merseyside coming into being, developed by colleagues across the system, and as I said, in the packs. The core features of the Health and Wellbeing Board setting the strategy for Wirral based upon that Wirral plan and developing a health and wellbeing strategy. A place-based partnership, which I'll come on to shortly, that starts to guide some of the delivery around the health and care elements of that. A place lead, myself, although I regard myself as a leader amongst leaders within place, a convener of the system. There are many leaders in this system from across all sectors, and my job's to get alongside them, understand their worlds and understand how health and care can contribute to that. And then a provider partnership that starts to coalesce some of the delivery of the things we need to do, and that partnership being NHS trusts, primary care, GPs, optoms, dentists, community pharmacists, voluntary community faith sector, domiciliary care providers, etc. And I think the makeup of that is again, as I said, there within the packs. Our governance map therefore looks like this, and on the left-hand side it maps very much across to some of the some of the systems and processes that the Council has in place, because this is a partnership of many organisations. And as I've said, the Health and Wellbeing Board, with the Integrated Care Partnership, with the Cheshire and Merseyside Health and Care Partnership, very much drives the strategy that we need to deliver as a place partnership board. When that place partnership board needs to make decisions, at the moment they are reserved for Wirral Council and NHS Cheshire and Merseyside, and that would flip into a decision-making body of elected members and myself to make decisions. So the most recent example being the deployment of the Adult Social Care Discharge Funds, which we heard referenced earlier. On that board, we have 2 representatives of the voluntary community faith and social enterprise sector. We've got a memorandum of understanding with that sector. That sector elects those people to attend and equally sends 2 people to each of those supporting groups as well. The role of those representatives is to represent the sector, not their organisations, and act as a liaison point into all parts of that, including Wirral Provider Partnership. Equally, 4 spaces are reserved for primary care, so we will effectively and eventually reflect those 4 elements of primary care as dentists, general practice optometrists and pharmacists. At the moment, on the board, we have a representative from the dental community, elected from the Primary Care Council, and 2 GPs. And again, we ask our local Primary Care Council to elect the representatives to be on those particular bodies. So in terms of the place-based partnership board and the supporting groups, that's where we look at why we're doing things and agree why we're doing things. We understand what needs to happen, when, and have a good idea of the how, but then work with Wirral Provider Partnership to deliver the how. So what are we working on? Well, these have been translated into place objectives, which set out what we need to do. And as I said, they're in the packs. But just in terms of the first one, we're working at the moment on the refresh of a Wirral delivery plan based on the 2023-24 planning guidance, the Health and Care Partnership Strategy, and the forthcoming joint plan. We think, in terms of linking that to the second bullet point about greater independence, we have 3 really big things we want to tackle going forward. Home first approach, which means assessing people in their own homes rather than in a hospital setting, which increases their ability to stay in a home or home-like setting. Alongside that, we would align our work around virtual wards. That's going extremely well. We've had 58 patients was the target in terms of the respiratory element of that through by December. We actually had 88 patients through that service, and frailty met its target of having 40 patients through that service by December, and these were services set up in the summer of last year. We're also very focused on care market sustainability, so improving the domiciliary care market and supporting care home provision as well. A real focus on children and young people, so not just about not just about responding to the recent Ofsted written statement of action around special education needs and development, but working in partnership around things like the Breaking the Cycle work, which concentrates on the most deprived areas of our borough and looks at a cradle to career approach. And I know Knowsley are also running something similar, but also looking at reducing waiting times, improving access for children and young people to mental health services. One of our key sentinel measures around happy, active, healthy lives is to make sure that everybody, 80% of people diagnosed with hypertension will receive treatment. And given that, as I said earlier, we have significant challenges around cardiovascular disease, that preventative approach is something that we are really working closely with primary care upon. And as I said, I think I touched upon how we're integrating primary care colleagues into our place governance, but also into our delivery, as well as the voluntary community-based social enterprise sector. And certainly as we move forward on Home First, we're looking at that being a mixture of social workers, therapists, and other sort of traditional health and care staff. But there's absolutely a role that our voluntary community, faith and social enterprise sector is playing and will need to continue to play in supporting people in getting back to their own homes as an equal partner in our system, as an influencer on what we do within our system. And then finally, I think one of the things we want to start to work on, and this is about the development of our neighbourhood care communities model, which we did start pre-COVID, and then COVID put that back. But we are looking at how we use that map of the wards we had earlier, our intelligence around the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, our knowledge from the tartan rug about where the areas of most need are, and the fact that Wirral has some really vibrant community groups and communities that have shown incredible resilience over the last few years, who will get into parts of the borough that we can't get into as statutory organisations, and work with and alongside them to move that paradigm from sort of the state telling people what to do to working with our communities about what they need from us, and ensuring that our care services, particularly our primary care networks, our district nurses and other services, are very much aligned around those needs of the communities as we move forward. And I think going forward, that's one of our, alongside things we know we have to do from the planning guidance, we will be putting very much that delivery model for all ages at front and centre, as well as doing some more extensive work on children and young people, which at the moment the NHS planning guidance is quite sparse upon, but we know there is a great need in Wirral around delivering that, as I said, around the breaking the cycle and cradle to career work. So that's a very brief skip through, giving a picture of Wirral. I think the next stage is Frankie's story. So I'm clicking for this, aren't I, Lorna? So I just introduced Lorna, who's Lorna Quigley, who's the Associate Director for Quality and Safety in the Wirral Place team.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, if you can drive the slides for me, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So, as we've already said, Frankie didn't want to attend today, so I hope I do justice to the story of Frankie. Just a little bit of context, but in December last year, the Wirral system underwent a joint targeted area inspection, and the focus of this was around how we work in partnership for early help for children and young people in need. And as part of the process, we had to undertake, or the inspectors undertook, a case audit of 6 of our most vulnerable and complex children that we had. And what they found was that we'd actually made a positive difference to the lives of 5 out of our 6 children. And this is one of the children that we did make a difference to. So this is where Frankie is sort of as of December. So I'm Frankie and I'm 16 years old. I live with my mum and my younger brother in South Wirral. My dad doesn't live with us, but he's around sometimes. We have contact, but we don't always get on. I sometimes struggle with my mental health and I've attempted suicide before, but I do feel more positive now. My mum struggles with low mood and drug and alcohol use. I have a diagnosis of autism and I've been missing from home on three times, and this has caused problems between me and my mum. I've just started college, which I'm enjoying, and I have an education, health and care plan. I'm supported by a mentor. I had a social worker for over 2 years, as there were some concerns about my safety and possible exploitation, because I was sexually assaulted in a relationship that I had. Okay, next slide. So it wasn't always like that for Frankie. And so I just sort of want us to go through really what happened to her before she got to where she is today. So Frankie became known to the Children's Services back in January 2019, and that was because she was running away from home. She was returned to home safe and well, but said she just lost track of time. But Catch 22, our missing from home service, undertook what we call a return home interview. And the parents disclosed to them that they were struggling with her behaviour and how they were managing her. So what the organisation did is they advised Frankie's parents to go and meet with the school and try and set up what's called a team around the family meeting, which they did. And she received support through that mechanism. At the time, Frankie was also referred to our children and adult mental health services, which we call CAMS. But due to the support that she was already accessing through those services that had been put in place, the referral was declined. However, the following month, Frankie was admitted to Wirral Park Hospital after cutting herself, and referrals were made then to Children's Services, Merseyside Police, and also back into the Children's Mental Health Services. And this time the referral was made, and the referral was accepted and open into that mental health service. The family were also known to Children's Services due to domestic abuse between Frankie's parents. And this resulted in consideration in what we call the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference, and an individual violence advisor was allocated to work with Frankie's mum. The family also worked with another one of our third sector organisations, which is Wired, who provided family support as part of Level 2, or that early help offer. In March 21, another referral to social care was made because of reports of Frankie being seen with a group of adult males. And at this stage, a multi-agency strategy meeting was held, and Frankie was referred to another third sector organisation called Compass, which has a child exploitation team. And again, another multi-agency plan was put in place to try and protect her. Frankie had made more self-harming events, but through the plan and working with the voluntary organisations, we supported her mental health and her well-being and kept her safe from sexual exploitation. In September 22, Frankie did make an allegation of rape against a 17-year-old male, and that she was the victim of domestic violence and sexual assault. This case remains live today, and Frankie also has been allocated to an advisor who is supporting her through this. Due to the progress, though, that Frankie had made, in November, her case has been stepped down into what we call our early help support, or early help service, because of all the agencies that are working together and the clear plan that we have in place for her. Okay, next slide. So, on slide 3, what we've got here is just some areas of good practice. What I think this case has actually demonstrated that we've got true multi-agency working from both children's services, the police, and also our health services. Certainly we found that Frankie had a really good relationship with her social worker. Throughout the whole of Frankie's case, what we call the voice of the child was taken into account at all stage. The police are continuing to investigate. From a health service perspective, we certainly had an MDT approach, and we acknowledge that at times it's difficult to measure that improvement, but certainly health visitors, school nurses have been working with Frankie diligently. So these are just some of the comments that we've had, really. And then the final comment we've got is from our inspectors. If you can just give us that one, thank you. So how they found, and after speaking to the family, also reviewing the case, they found that there was some good evidence there that we'd actually made a difference. And whilst it might not be the ideal situation, we've now got somebody who is feeling much happier. And again, just thinking from what she said back to her story, that she feels much more positive. She's started college and she's getting help and support. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lorna and Simon. Really interesting and good story about Frankie. I hope we wish her well. Any comments, urgent comments or questions for the team here? Rowan, then I'll come to Erica.
Thanks very much. It's good to hear of good outcomes for Frankie, and indeed 5 of 6 that were looked at. That does mean there's always room to improve. Are there any particular comments about what would take you to the position of feeling confident that next time 6 of 6 are reviewed and considered to be really good? Because, as I say, good to hear good stuff, but always to learn as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, the 6th case, when we were informed of the 6th case that we hadn't made that difference, we've absolutely done a deep dive into it. Again, it was a young person, this was a young male, who was part of a county lines gang, and we never got back to as far back as what we could do with that. And I think, again, it's that element of early intervention that's absolutely needed, and how as agencies we work together to identify people earlier so that actually you can draw them back before they get into difficulties. So I think that's certainly a lesson from us from that. And it's certainly around relationships, working with different agencies as well, and how we work together.
Thank you. Erica?
It's thank you to Siren. I'm just so happy to see you. We've heard in that piece some really good examples of best practice, and I suppose my question is, how easy are those best practices to share around the other places? So I'm thinking, you know, of scale, of just how easy is that for you?
I think in terms of the governance piece, Mike has been working very closely with the governance leads within our system and across the other places as well. And I think we've done a bit of magpieing off of one another as well. So we've borrowed bits from other areas. I've always had, because I started in the voluntary community sector before joining the NHS, I've always had strong knowledge and affinity with that sector. And certainly Karen and Warren through Karen has really influenced how we've engaged with the voluntary sector. Primary care, again, that's about, for me, it's been about building relationships, so regular creating the Primary Care Council with the support of the LMC, bringing in all the other representatives from primary care in its widest sense, and then me actually doing work in terms of local representative groups. And then finally also just in terms of knowing your places, getting out and spending time. I feel now, post-pandemic, I've rediscovered Wirral. I've been able to get out and spend time with community groups, with services, etc. And certainly I think one that's really struck with me is a visit with our community connectors, which is run by our Involved Northwest. So each of the 9 sort of zones of Wirral has a strong community connector present. So they go out and find people who might need services, support them back into employment. They link in with our primary care network social prescribers. But just in terms of our collective ambition as a board around ameliorating the cost of living impact, I went and saw people who had next to nothing, giving stuff to people who had absolutely nothing. And I saw how, we have 26 social supermarkets on Wirral. And I'm not sure if I'm particularly proud of having 26 social supermarkets. But what I'm saying, by doing that, by looking, seeing, understanding, working with those groups and working alongside those communities, it makes us stronger in what we can provide in terms of health and care. And for me, it also reinforces in terms of the emergency care agenda that absolutely need to focus on virtual wards and a home-first approach, because most people don't want to go into residential care unless they really, really need it. I'm not sure if that answers your question at all, but I think it is easy because we talk amongst each other as place directors, and that's the benefit of NHS Cheshire and Merseyside as a network.
Thanks, Simon. Ian?
Hi, so Ian, Public Health Representative. Really just thanks, Simon, and to take on the previous question. Our public health and intelligence teams work really closely, so it's really great to see that intelligence-led approach Simon shared, but we can learn from each other, so we try to cascade that and try and get different, better ways to present the information. And also, it's really powerful and grateful to Frankie for sharing that. It showed the real reach that we have with our community sector, doesn't it, on the different wellbeing and within our council services. So I thought it was just really acknowledging that. It's really powerful. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, I'm going to move us on, if that's okay. Thanks again, Simon and Lorna. So let's go to agenda item 9. That's Chris Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. The report provides an overview of some of the current risks and issues that may impact on quality and safety within the Cheshire and Mersey system. And I want to pull out some of the highlights from the report, and firstly is around industrial action and the system-wide operational pressures that have been previously mentioned in the CEO report. But I wanted to share just some of the details in respect of the quality aspects around that. So from an industrial action point of view, we have a joint clinical and people cell, which has met twice weekly since the beginning of November. And the aim of that cell is to plan and mitigate the associated risks and ensure that there's patient safety as a result that may occur as a result of the industrial action. With regards to the operational pressures, and it's been previously mentioned with regards to corridor care, so thank you for that feedback. But we've been working with our regional colleagues to develop a suite of documents around ensuring professional standards so that what patients can expect when receiving care that we would not want to give in corridors, but due to the pressures, organisations have been left with no other option. And should any serious incidents be recorded during these times, then they are fed back through into our quality and performance committee. And we do focus on those serious incidents on a monthly basis. The report also shares about an all-age continuing healthcare review, which is currently underway. So we have 4 different delivery models across the Cheshire and Mersey footprint at the moment in respect of all-age continuing healthcare. And the purpose of the review is to deliver a model that's designed to deliver equity, consistency, value and quality assurance, but whilst we still build upon the strength and best practice that currently exists in each of the places. And due to the complexity in the differing models, it will be a significant piece of work to complete. In respect of the item on special education needs and disability, the report outlines the details around legislation around SEND and the new statutory guidance that was published at the end of November and came into force on the 1st of January. And it focuses on placing increased focus on and impact that local area partnerships have on experiences and outcome of our children, young people. And SEND teams are preparing for potential inspections. So those were the areas that I wanted to draw the board's attention to within the report. And I'm happy to take any comments or questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. Questions or comments? Paper. Comfortable? Okay, so the recommendation, Chris, is to note the note the contents of the report and request any additional information assurance, and happy to accept that. Thank you. If we could go to agenda item 10, finance report, Claire.
And we've used key data information from the providers this month because we've applied a full set of accounts.
Can you speak up, please? We can't hear you, sorry.
Good point, thank you, sorry about that. So, as I was saying, the report sets out the financial position for the system for the end of December, so for month 9. Full accounts are prepared by the NHS each quarter end. So at month 9, the deadlines are slightly later, which means that the information we've got available to us for this report is based upon the key data that we got last week rather than the full accounts that we had yesterday. The information will be the same, it's just it's not as granular as it would normally be. So the position is such that we are reporting an actual deficit of £72 million against a plan of where we thought we'd be at this point of the year, which is a deficit of 35 million. So we are £36.9 million away from where we'd expected to be at this point in the year. Separate to that, individual organisations are asked to assess the financial risk of delivering the plan as expected by the end of the year. So clearly, the fact that we are already away from plan would indicate that we have quite a bit of unmitigated risk in our position. So the assessment at the moment by our 17 organisations is that the unmitigated risk for them as they move through the next couple of months of the year is £37 million. And so we're working across the system to identify ways to mitigate that so that we can deliver the plan by the end of the year. And that includes looking at things like additional allocations that we might receive that we didn't plan to get. And there is £8 million worth of depreciation funding that we are going to expect in the next couple of months. And we're also looking at the impact of the interest rate improvements or increase in interest rates, which have enabled us to earn more income on our cash balances. So the full set of mitigations that we're looking at is set out in section 18, but we do anticipate that we will still deliver the financial plan across the whole system because some organisations will be able to improve their position whilst other organisations are struggling to deliver their plan. And overall, that will offset and help us deliver the overall position as planned. The ICB's own financial position is set out in sections 6 and 7 in the report, and we also set out there the work that we're doing to ensure that we deliver our own financial plan. It has also been, finance has been a key focus for us in the recent place-based reviews that we've been doing with each place. So we've got 9 places, and Graham, myself and Claire have met with the place teams in each area to consider their financial position and the risks and delivery of cost improvement programmes and efficiencies over the coming months. So I'll leave it there and open up to questions or comments before then taking the recommendations from the report.
Chair, Graham. I'm particularly struck by the information that you include in Appendix 3 about the agency spend. And one of the things that I think would be helpful for us to see is those numbers not compared to the organisation's own plan, but those numbers compared to the actual spend pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Because I think that is a kind of measure of something that's not right. You know, it's a measure of our inability to recruit permanent staff, but it's also a measure of the fact that we will be paying over the odds to fill essential shifts. And given that we know that the financial situation is not going to get any better, this feels like this is going to be a major plank for action for us. So I just think some extra information will help us focus our minds and will help focus the minds of the organisations incurring these costs as well.
Neil?
Yeah, just an observation with this report, Claire, compared to previous. It looks like we're moving in the right direction. I know there's a lot of risks and mitigation still to come out, but it looks like things are going the right way, but still very challenging.
Yes, right? I agree. The unmitigated risk position has halved this month. Yeah, I agree. And yeah, no problem. I'll take that action away, Graham. Just to say on the agency costs, whilst we have seen some significant growth since pre-pandemic, we are one of the lower growth systems in the country. So it's not great because we're still seeing that performance compared to other systems shows that our trusts are doing, you know, relatively speaking, quite well. I'll add that to the future reports.
I don't think it needs to be permanently added, but I think it's like a deep dive topic. We should see. Apologies. I don't want to create the burden of it being a regular reporting item. I think we should just see it compared at a point in time to pre-pandemic levels to give us that reference point. We can then go back to just comparing with plan. It's to stimulate the conversation about, are the plans ambitious enough?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the recommendation was just to note the contents of the report and the work being done to deliver the plan. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Go to agenda item 11. Anthony.
Thank you, Chairman. There's quite a comprehensive report in front of you, and board members will note that it now includes both provider and place-based analysis of deliverables. Absolutely accept it's a very large report, but I guess that's one of the products of having a very large footprint and significant numbers of providers and places contained within that. But we continue to work through the Performance and Quality Committee to streamline that to a level that meets the requirements at various levels of governance. As been mentioned a couple of times, both in Graham's heads up and some of the information that Chris has pointed to, you know, this report looks at the position as at the end of December, where pressures were already of a significant level, but those pressures carried through very much into the start of the calendar year. So when we look forward to the report next month, I think we will see some stark changes in terms of the January deliverables. But as Graham has pointed out, the situation has somewhat appeased in the past couple of weeks. But to put it into context about where we were at the start of the calendar year, we have a system of reporting operational pressures escalation levels across our acute providers. That ranges from level 1 through to 4. And if you're at level 4, basically it's a position where you are experiencing care on corridors, delays with ambulance handovers, insufficient capacity to admit patients, some real compromising of real emergency pathways and optimum standards of timeliness. At one point in the first week of January, the Cheshire and Merseyside system had 5 acute providers declaring that Opal 4. And that's not to say that the others were far behind. The other 5 were on Opal 3. What we don't have is an appropriate way of that presenting that operating level across our mental health providers, our primary care or community providers, But what we do have, and what commenced on the 1st of December, is that the ICB stood up its Strategic Coordination Centre, and that allows us to take information from across all the system in terms of provision in real time, and understand where mutual aid or other levers can be pulled to try and balance the load, if you like, across the entire system. What we saw through those meetings in January was absolutely the same level of escalation that was taking place in all of those providers and services. It was a really pressurised position. And as Chris's paper has already pointed out, there are steps that we take to understand how the safety and the quality and the patient experience is being managed during those pressures. What I would say is that, I absolutely pick up on all the comments that have been made about this funding and the short-sightedness of it, and the release of it so late in the day. I think that the national argument would be it was a response to the pressures that were being experienced. People may have had views about whether that would have been better earlier in the year. Some monies were released earlier in the year, and it was a question at board last month as to whether we could have an update on where some of that money had been spent, particularly in the mobilisation of additional acute beds that was funded at the end of September. So we have a trajectory to increase the overall acute capacity by 206 beds. The trajectory of that was to have had 161 mobilised by the end of December, and we'd actually mobilised 194, which is a credit to those organisations that they were not only were they committed to delivering it as fast as possible, but probably also a reflection of the pressure that was already being there, and it was born out of necessity as well as effort and energy. We are, even with that latest allocation of just under 10 million, and recognising the real workforce that exists across the social and care sector, nevertheless we are pushing as hard as we can to try and get some of that capacity mobilised. The initial trawl of what can be possible with the care home and care sector providers came through yesterday. It's still a difficult one to push. It is workforce challenged in its extreme, but there is the opportunity at this point in time to raise an additional 200 care home beds for the benefit and try to decompress the acute sector. And we're working through what we can do to try and increase the volume of domiciliary care hours that are available. Those providers are really pulling the stops out with us and looking at how they're managing the risk across their wider bed base to try and help that really have proved tangible benefit. So I'll park urgent care there for a while. I think it's been covered in some extreme, but I'm happy to come back to it at the end, Chairman.
Thank you, Anthony.
One of the things I wanted to concentrate on was elective care. In all of this, we are still very conscious that there are a number of people that have been experiencing very long waits for elective care, and that was, wholly exacerbated by the pandemic. And one of the key objectives that we have this year is to eliminate waiting lists over 18 months by the end of March, and the Cheshire and Mersey system is working very well on that. And there is a level of confidence that we can achieve that goal by the end of March. There is impact that's being driven by industrial action and winter pressures, but nevertheless the system is working to recoup some of that impact, and it's a credit to the staff that those same staff that are quite rightly taking industrial action are working with us to try and recover it in the same way. We do recognise we have pressures at individual providers, we do recognise we have pressures against individual specialties, but the elective programme of Cheshire and Mersey is doing phenomenal efforts to try and move patients around the system and ensure equity of access for all. So, we can demonstrate that there's at least 1,000 patients that were on waiting lists at one acute provider and have transferred to another to gain faster access to their operation. There's a further 1,500 in the pipeline that's done that. And even working beyond that footprint, we can evidence where the Cheshire and Mersey has provided mutual aid in some of the specialised services like paediatrics to other areas in the northwest like Greater Manchester. And even beyond that footprint, we can also evidence at least 350 patients that have been treated as part of the national response to the corneal challenge that exists in eye care. So I think we are playing our part locally. I think we're also playing our part regionally and nationally within elective care, and we'll continue to update the board on progress towards that key objective by the end of March. Rowan, I was going to invite you in, if that's okay, to talk a little bit about cancer.
Thank you very much. We keep a really close working brief as what is happening for our cancer patients. It's very easy to view cancer as having that headline of a single word, cancer patients. And yet we know that that represents over 200 different tumour types. And in fact, it takes, on average, between 6 and 10 different diagnostics to get that referral right. And right now, we've got 14,000 patients in Cheshire and Merseyside being managed on their suspected cancer pathways. And every week, 565 treatments go ahead. And whilst it's pleasing that 95% of our patients get their first treatment within 31 days, an area of huge scrutiny and effort is the target around 62-day turnaround for patients. And that's been a massive challenge most recently. What is driving that challenge is that the referrals through the urgent 2-week wait referrals overall are at 130% of what we dealt with before COVID. And in particular pathways, particularly lower colorectal suspected cancers, that's running at closer to 160% of pre-pandemic pathways. What is striking is that the conversion of those into being genuine cancers, whilst it's encouraging it's 6% and not higher than that, that 6% is holding true even in the face of increased demand, which tells us that these are patients who've done what the NHS asked. They stayed home and they kept the NHS safe, and disease has therefore continued to grow. What I'm pleased to see is that overall, despite that particular challenge, we are actually improving the number of early stage cancers that we are detecting. So huge effort goes into tackling this particular group of patients who risk waiting more than 62 days. And we've got one particular provider in Liverpool that is challenged with that. Although I'm pleased to see that in the first 2 weeks of January, they've reduced those numbers by 27%. It was over 1,000. But all effort goes into getting those patients through that pathway to diagnosis and on to treatment. And that again speaks to the needs of mutual aid, other hospitals helping out, making the pathway work as well as it can. There's additional training going in with the cancer teams to get this working as well as it possibly can for these patients. It's an area of huge scrutiny from us and indeed those that we report through to, and we will continue to report progress on this back to board because it is such an essential area of care that is being provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any questions or comments? Chris?
Yeah, thank you. It was just to pick up on the point and to give a little bit of further information and background in respect of the discharge funding. And I just wanted to assure the board that we're developing a suite of quality metrics and patient experience measure as well, so that we can ensure that any patient who was transferred into a care home using this route, that we are capturing that data, and we will look to work with our Health Watch colleagues around how we collect that patient user service and carer experience moving forward.
Thanks, Chris. Go Anne and Warren.
It's just to comment on the situation as regards to the way in which the pressures on urgent care affect the elective recovery. Really, to be on Opal 4, one thing for sure, any acute trust will have done is flipped all of the surgical beds into being medical beds. So obviously what we will not have is, patients waiting around in A&E for a medical bed when we've got surgical beds still designated as such. So the way it works is we would treat the urgent patients, among them would be the cancer patients, but we treat the emergency surgical patients, but what we won't be doing is treating the routine elective patients. So we've gone to these huge lengths to try and have all these programmes in place to get, to tackle the elective backlog that we've got with the people waiting too long that Anthony described. But then we end up cancelling them all because we've got no beds for the patients. So the frustration is we might have theatres and we might have surgeons, but then we've got no beds to put the patients in. So it's so frustrating to be trying to make the best out of this really difficult situation when we've got urgent, non-elective patients needing care, but also a waiting list that needs to be dealt with as well. And when we get to Opal 4, that's when it's all unravelled, and what we've got to do is focus all of our efforts on to just managing the emergencies coming through the front door and try and deliver that service the best way we can. So, you know, as someone who's taken a role from a provider collaborative point of view and trying to manage the elective recovery, you know, you see it all crumble. And also, you know, Graham mentioned the fact that we've had probably a disproportionate effect of industrial action, and again, that also does affect us being able to maintain surgical activity, because usually there's some protection of the urgent activity but not of the routine activity. So unfortunately, you know, we're doing our very best to try and clear this backlog of long waiting patients, but there are many things that are frustrating those efforts just at the moment, which are understandable but unfortunate.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, for the collaboratives and the community collaboratives and our primary care colleagues for supporting the elective care programme. Despite all those challenges, we're doing relatively well. That's great. But did I hear you and put some further risk on our achievement of the 18-month target?
I remain optimistic, Raj.
Okay. I'll move on from Warren.
Well, thank you very much for the report, Anthony. I think I'm just conscious that a lot of us are working on the hospital discharge conversations about how they operate. I know with the councils, voluntary sector, it's happening at Place, it's happening in acute trust, it's happening in nursing. I know Rowan's leading on a piece. I just wonder whether this is something we should anticipate. And I know it looks like winter's over today, but it's going to happen again next year. If we had a bit of a review about how we could work better in partnership across all the sectors in terms of delivering this for next year, because it's going to happen again, and it's an ongoing issue in terms of acute trusts anyway.
Thanks, Warren. Anthony, do you want to...
Yeah, absolutely recognise that, Warren. I know we've had previous conversations about, that even before we get to the stage of a formal debrief on this winter, we know that's an area that we can optimise and work better across in terms of the planning for next year. So certainly, yeah, I look forward to working myself and you and to work on some of that approach and plan earlier in the year than is normally the case for winter planning.
And Anthony, did you have a month that you're going to do that in?
I think I would normally expect to start planning in June. The system would suggest September, but I would like to start it,
June.
In June.
To do the debrief.
Oh no, sorry. The planning for next winter would be June. I think in terms of a debrief, we need to complete that before the end of this quarter.
Okay, good. For March. Thanks. Go to Sarah and then Tony.
Just to share some of the patient feedback on some of the data that's in there. Obviously, it's very serious reading and it reflects a system that's under huge pressure. Wanted to feedback in on the human side to the elective waiting times. It's really good that the trusts are working together to try and clear that backlog and to address the 18-month waits. But we've still got huge volumes of 52-week waits, and it's just not to neglect the human side of this, because we hear of people talking about feeling that they're left in the dark, that the communication is just really challenging, and it's really hard if you're a trust with 10,000 people waiting that long to keep in communication with people and help them to know what to expect, and especially when you're having to cancel things that you've planned. But it's also that people are making decisions about whether they can stay in work when their health is affecting their ability. So they're making lifetime decisions. It's affecting their mental health. They're living with huge amounts of pain sometimes, with a knock-on effect on primary care. And people have also told us, which is something that I probably should have guessed, but I hadn't thought through, about how it's impacted on their relationships. Because when they're living in long-term pain, it's affecting their mood. They're taking it out on their partners. And it's that impact then spreads wider than the numbers that are reflected on those sheets. A point on the cancer rates, it's just the huge pressures that places on individuals and their families. Even if you get a negative test result back, which is obviously great news, if you've waited for much longer than we would like to get that result, it's people's lives are put on hold with huge stresses for those times when they wait. And then obviously we don't want any delays to people where it's a positive positive diagnosis, we want their treatment to be escalated as fast as possible. And one final point is just really interested to read about the learning disability health checks and the pilot in Liverpool. And we'd be very happy to help with that because we're leading in Liverpool on learning disability engagement around health and care issues. So anything we can do to support that and check whether people's experiences of that is as positive as it is on the data, we'd be keen to do.
Thank you. I mean, it's really, really important for us to be reminded that those numbers have real people behind them and the consequences. Thank you for that. Tony?
Thanks for the report, Anthony. You're quite right in the report to point out that what's driving the work to reduce the 78-week wait is that patients deteriorate if they're waiting a long time. But you also know that while that work is going on and the numbers are coming down, there's still the increasing numbers of people actually being referred. So I think what we'd like to hear a little bit more about is how you're trying to balance those two trends of reducing 78 weeks, but also coping with the increasing numbers actually being referred. You've referenced mutual aid and the use of elective hubs. Could you just explain whether we should expect those to be the success stories for this?
Anthony?
So I think you're right, Tony. The mutual aid kind of talks to people that are already on the waiting list, really, and that's effective in trying to ensure that long waiting times are equitable across our patch. I think, you know, the reality is, in terms of the referrals, it grows each and every year. And as part of our annual operational planning cycle, we take that into account in terms of how we are trying to size our resources to deal with that demand. Yes, it's took quite a knock in terms of, you know, the waiting lists, and the impact of COVID still continues. So we're not quite, we are close to, but we're not quite back to the same operating levels as we were pre-COVID. But the expectation is that we can step that up during the course of this year to a level that will offset that increased referral demand. So that's just, I guess, the mechanics of the demand and capacity side of things. But, you know, I don't know if, Rowan, you want to talk about anything that we're doing in terms of alternatives to referrals, some clinical interventions, etc.
Yeah, it is no coincidence that the Senior Responsible Officer for Cancer, Liz Bishop from Clatterbridge, is also leading the diagnostics programme. So actually standing up and opening additional diagnostic capacity is a really crucial part to this, and further funding has been awarded to support that. We are treating more cancer patients now than we ever have, but still there's that critical backlog to work its way through. So we continue to model for that. The mutual aid, particularly through endoscopy, has been superb, and I know trusts, including St Helens and Nosey, even through the pandemic, were taking patients, cancer patients, from other hospitals. And in my own surgical specialty, we're supporting surrounding trusts by getting surgery done for patients. The point of us as a system is to try and even that out. It isn't easy, and it's still a journey that we've got to make to get that as a really fully functional system. But that's certainly the ambition, so that it is as fair and equitable no matter where you present with symptoms, and that's still a journey to make. But thank you for the question.
We'll take one last question from Simon.
Yes, Chair, just as Senior Responsible Officer for the Transforming Care Programme, just to pick up on that issue around learning disability health checks, and welcome support around that. The target for last year was 70%. For next year, it's 75%. Our aspiration should be nearer 100%, because that means that 25% of people aren't getting a health check. And when you look at the data, there are some people who have refused it, and refused it in the full knowledge, but there's some people we just haven't got to. So any help in doing that would be really welcome, because this is something that our primary care colleagues do need some support upon. And the variation, certainly in Wirral, ranged from 8% to 100% coverage of people on the register, which is completely unacceptable as a range of variation. And we've done some very much targeted work around that, but any help around that is extremely welcome.
Thanks, Simon. And you'll do some reaching out, will you, to that offer? Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on. The report was here for noting, a couple of points made. First, about agency comparisons, and the debrief about winter, and the last point about health check. and the reminder that these numbers have real people behind them, and what our people do out there in our organisations really, really matters. So thank you for that. Let's move on to the agenda item 12, the review of Liverpool Clinical Services, led by Graham and Jan.
Thanks, Raj. Thank you. So we received today the clinical services, or the outcome of the clinical services review, which was independently done by an outside organisation and is a reflection of the complexity of the system that we operate within Liverpool, particularly on the acute side of the fence. It sets out opportunities for us as a system in terms of greater collaboration between acute and specialised organisations, optimise clinical pathways for the benefit of patients, and identifies areas where we could improve outcomes for our population more greatly. It acknowledges that we have a range of providers across the city, but they also treat populations that are much broader than just the Liverpool population, taking in as far as the Isle of Man and North Wales in many situations. So we do have to reflect the fact that the cooperation and communication that we have to have around the review is much broader than just Liverpool. We also need to think about the opportunities that is identified. There are 12 priorities areas in here. It did focus on 2 specifically and 3 generally. But we do need to think about the opportunity that it provides for us in terms of the outcomes for the system. I'm not going to go into detail. The report is there for consideration. I think we have to acknowledge that this report assumed, I think, that specialised services would be delegated to ICBs from the 1st of April this year. That has been delayed for a year, so we do have to think about our engagement with NHS England in terms of specialised services. We also, I think, in terms of the recommendations, need to accept that some of the corporate service recommendations that it suggested CMAST should lead on. We would, I think, leave it to CMAST to determine what those priorities would be, but actually, produce a work programme that we can see and will contribute to delivering those corporate service opportunities. We also have to consider any consequences of any service change. It doesn't go into detail around any service change options in the paper, but we need to consider that as an ICB, and any service change would require, obviously, the involvement of the wider system, primary care, mental health, social care and neighbouring providers. But also we have a duty to engage and consult more broadly with the public on patients on any proposals that we might bring back in the future. So the board is asked to approve in full the recommendations in the report and note the implementation plan, albeit high level at this stage. I know that there's a lot of detail in here that will require further planning, and we would want to bring back regular updates at appropriate intervals. I'm happy to take any questions, Raj.
Thanks, Jan. Any questions, comments?
Chair, we have a senior lecturer in midwifery here, Dr. Rebecca Smith, and I think it would be good to give her a few minutes to
As I said at the beginning of the meeting, we're happy to take questions, but we won't be interrupting the flow of this meeting with those questions. So unfortunately, she won't have the opportunity to talk directly to the board in this format, but we're happy to have a conversation after the board meeting.
I think you need to listen to the women.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. We need to listen to... Well, should we listen to what... Should we listen to the item and then see how we're going to go forward from it? Well, I hear what you've got to say, but I'm sorry, no, I've actually made a determination. So can I am, if you do interrupt this meeting, we're going to have to move. We're going to have to move on. So please let the meeting carry on, and immediately after the meeting, we will come and talk to you, and we will lay out how we're going to engage women, how we're going to engage peoples. I'm sorry. Please have some respect for the. Please have some respect for this meeting. So. So unless we're able to move on with this meeting, we'll have to suspend the meeting. That's really unfortunate, isn't it? But please let us get on. Please let us get on. Please let us get on with the meeting. Please. We couldn't. I'm sorry. You are interrupting the flow of the meeting. So should we carry on, or do we need to suspend the meeting? Should we carry on, or should we suspend the meeting? Should we? No, I've been really, really clear with the route forward. I've been really. Can you please give us some respect in terms of what we're trying to say and do for the populations of Cheshire and Merseyside? I'm not sure how much more I can say. I've repeated what I think is a very reasonable point. So I am going to suggest now we have to adjourn the meeting. And unless our members of the public are able to work with us in the way that we set out, we'll have to adjourn the meeting. Okay, so should we carry for? I am going to pause the meeting now.
I'm looking at the women now on this board. I look at all of you women on the board, and I'm asking you to look after women, listen to women. How can you sit on this board? I know you've not listened to women.
Okay, I'm going to. Can you let me carry on? If you let me carry on, I'm going to suggest I've adjourned the meeting. But I am going to ask the Chief Exec, the Medical Director and our Nurse Director to speak to members of the public for 10 minutes, and you could have that opportunity to speak to them, and then they can come back into the meeting. Yeah? I'm sorry, that's If that's okay. People comfortable? I think everybody's here. I know we've had a couple of people who've had to leave. And thank you for this. Thank you. Okay. Let's carry on with the review of Liverpool Clinical Services. Jan?
Me, probably.
You? Graham,
Yeah.
then.
Thank you very much for your forbearance. Thank you for talking to us, and thank you for talking to us so frankly and so clearly. I obviously just need to find a way of summarising that conversation for the board, and I will try and do it thus. So bear with me for a second. There is clearly a mismatch or a concern between the public's view of what accepting, endorsing this report means and what we as a board think that means. And I think, therefore, given that mismatch, it would probably be a breach of good faith for us to formally endorse the Carnell-Farrer report today. No. Let me finish. But I also want to be really clear that I think that Carnell-Farrer have delivered on the brief that we gave them. I think they have produced a piece of work that helps us to move forward. And so whilst I am happy to move the recommendation from one of saying that we should accept and endorse the Carnell-Farrer report to one that says that we should note the content of the Carnell-Farrer report, what I would say is I am still going to be asking the board to accept and adopt the implementation plan that we have set out that now moves us forward. And I want to say two things in that regard by way of illustration. Firstly, we are really clear that this conversation invokes a difference of opinion. And one of the things that we're really clear about is we will only move forward by appointing an independent clinical advisor. And you'll see that's one of the recommendations. You're also really clear that the recommendations set out that there will be no service change without full public engagement and consultation. So I do not want people to think that by accepting the Carnell-Farrer report, which I'm now saying we will note rather than endorse, that there has been any predetermination of the future solution. What I'm very clear about is a range of conflicting advice and information has been presented to us that gives the board, or should give the board, great concern. And we need to move forward to the next stage of forming the subcommittee of the board to undertake this work so that we can come up with and generate options for consideration for the future. We will come back and set out at our future meetings arrangements for wider public engagement on this, and we will address a range of the questions. We will address all of the questions and publish them on our website, but we will address a range of those questions that are most pertinent in our public meeting next time in February. Now, Mr. Chairman, that kind of takes us into a place of the issues in the report around women's services. There are, of course, also issues in the report associated with Liverpool, Heart and Chest and the Royal, the Walton Centre and Aintree. Those are items that we've not discussed with members of the public, so we should just give the board the chance to come back and comment on any of those. And I think the other thing that is probably worth me saying, Chair, is I also discussed with members of the public the difference between our meeting that we are holding in public and a public meeting. And I have reiterated the fact that coinciding with board meetings in the past, we have had meetings with members of the public, myself, the medical director, the nurse director. I know you have done the same, and our offer to do that will remain and continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Okay, so Jan, do you want to take us on in the report?
No, I think we're happy to take any questions,
Okay.
Raj.
So any questions? Mm-hmm.
First of all, I've got to say I welcome Graham's commitment to the public to assure them that there'll be full consultation and engagement around any potential changes. My point is not specifically about the women's, but about the whole system. This is a report about mainly about hospitals based in Liverpool. But they don't, as the report refers to, they don't just serve the population of Liverpool, but they serve a much wider area. The report refers to the local authority being Liverpool City Council, but there are other local authorities who want to have an input into the future of health services. And I know we would through overview and scrutiny and so on, but I'm talking about planning the whole system and the assurance about having other councils involved as well and their input into this. And unfortunately, in a number of occasions, the report confuses the City of Liverpool with the Liverpool City region, and I think that's unfortunate. It's very focused around the population of Liverpool, which has great needs, of course, but it is a wider issue, as the configuration of hospital services and community health services are as well. So just to say that we in local government want to be fully involved in future discussions about this and be talking to people about what meets the best needs of our population and, of course, particular interests of women and other communities as well. Okay.
Thank you, Paul. Graham?
So, just for example, if you take Aintree Hospital, which is affected by this, of course, Aintree Hospital is used widely by some parts of Liverpool, some parts of Sefton, some parts of Knowsley. We recognise that wider input. We also recognise that there was a context to this report, and the context to this report was the not quite unique but different configuration of hospital services in Liverpool compared with most major cities in the UK. And so our start point was to very much look at that unusual configuration to work out where that in itself was giving us concerns to unnecessary patient handoffs, and therefore the start of the work was grounded within Liverpool. It's right and it's proper that within that report that we also name the fact that it has to happen within the context of the system that it is within, the context of community services, the context of primary care. Now, the other thing I would say in response to that point, Paul, is I think we work very effectively with each of the 9 local authorities on their local authority footprints. And you'll know that I had a meeting with 3 of perhaps the 4 most interested local authority chief executives earlier this week. And one of the things that we've talked about is how do we create that additional coming together around that shared planning and consideration of services. So I'm quite certain that working with your chief executive colleagues, we will come up with something that says that we can work really effectively at an individual place layer, but we can work really effectively together at another level as well, particularly when we are considering issues that cross boundaries in that way. I'll continue to work with your Chief Executive colleagues to develop proposals as to how we will do that. Paul?
Thanks, Chair. And then they can come to us and as politicians and see if we approve of those arrangements.
Paul, this is why I use the word proposal.
Exactly. Just to say, though, finally, and as a comment aimed at our audience, that looking at changing services, A, doesn't mean privatisation, that's not something we're going along with, and B, doesn't mean about cuts in services either. We want to enhance our services. So very much that's the direction from local government that we would like to take.
Thank you, Paul. Anne?
Yeah, taking on board Graham's comments about the women's health section. The previous question before the interruption to the meeting was, do we approve the recommendations? And there are some recommendations in there which, if applied only to the residents of Liverpool, would disadvantage people outside of Liverpool. So, certainly that wouldn't be a recommendation I think we should be taking on board, and we should make sure that all the Cheshire and Merseyside get the same access to services. And the second point, again, around some of the other collaborative suggestions in there. It's a bit like, well, Liverpool can collaborate and then the rest of Cheshire and Merseyside can work around it. Well, again, that's something I think we should just collaborate across the board, because our geography is such that we are very codependent on one another. The organisations are all very close together, so you might be outside of Liverpool but very close to Liverpool and therefore share services. And, like Graham was just talking about Aintree, well, of course, they're the major trauma centre for the whole of Cheshire and Merseyside. So, it is actually the whole of Cheshire and Merseyside that we use somewhere like Aintree. From that point in, there are many services, as we all well know, that are provided from those city locations, which absolutely are used by all the Cheshire and Merseyside, and as John I think said, North Wales and the Isle of Man as well. So. It's just that let's not get too Liverpool-centric when we think about some of these issues, because they do pertain to a much wider population.
Thanks, Anne. And I guess a comment from me would be that each one of those trust boards that are located in Liverpool absolutely have responsibilities for a wider group of patients, and they need to hold that responsibility very close to their chest. And we, of course, have the collaboratives, CMAST and the Learning and Mental Health Community Services Collaborative, and our primary care colleagues, who must also be heavily engaged to ensure we get that. We understand the impact, and we have equality across Cheshire and Merseyside. So we've got some governance stuff that could be knitted together reasonably well to protect the interests of all. Would you agree with that? Just make that right. Okay, any other questions? Sorry.
Just a short point. Obviously welcoming the clear confirmation that there will be engagement before there's any service changes, but just to confirm for the record that that doesn't just apply to the proposals that might arise around maternity services, but it also applies to the committees in common on those hospital sites. Anything that's going to result in a significant service change for the public are going to be involved in.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's a joint committee on those sides, just to be technical about it. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? Okay, so if we're happy to move on, I'm not going to attempt to replicate Graham's words about how we're going to note the report and continue with the implementation plan, but I think people got the essence, and we'll make sure this is minuted appropriately, it's really clear, be on our website, and hopefully we can bring some assurance to members of the public. Thank you. Let's go to agenda item 13. Claire.
Thank you. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to read the interim strategy. It's on our website for those who haven't got it in the paper. And with the cover sheet, you can hopefully see it's been developed in the spirit of co-production and co-design, building on all of the best practice and good work that's sort of happened before the ICB and HCP came into being. It builds on the work of the Health and Wellbeing Boards across the 9 local authorities, the Marmot Altogether Fairer report, and various other documents, including the former HCP strategy. So it's an interim strategy. We've followed guidance from the Department of Health and Social Care to develop a strategy by Christmas. Following feedback nationally, we're not actually required, it's not mandated to publish this, but we want to publish it because we're proud of it and it takes us as part of our next stage journey. It's an interim strategy, partly because the HCP isn't a formal joint committee yet, so the advice working with our local authority legal representatives is that we can endorse it from an HCP perspective and put it onto the ICB website, but our local authority partners didn't want to sort of recommend it to the future. You can see in 1.5, after the meeting on the 17th of January of the HCP, a number of further actions were required of the author and the team around the strategy. So we are going to do some further engagement work, and I think you'll recognise it is a long strategy, but it's a long strategy because we had to adopt a number of initiatives and priorities that have been asked of us nationally, but really all the partner organisations that we worked with were really keen to sort of promote and say all the fantastic work they're doing. So we built that into the strategy, but we recognise there are a lot of we will statements. So we are working through a prioritisation process that we will end up coming to the HCP in March, but I think it's important to note that that prioritisation process is being developed with colleagues in public health, regional OHID team, public health team, intelligence across quality, population health, finance and other colleagues, so we can really develop a framework that helps move the strategy forward. So we're going to, over the next few weeks, we'll be working with a number of groups across the system, trying to prioritise our priorities, and then when we present that to the HCP in March, we'll hopefully come up with 2 or 3 really key foci, priorities, that we'll take on board across Cheshire and Merseyside. So part 2 of the paper sort of gives you a chronology of how the strategy was developed, all the engagement work with all of the partner organisations. I think it's just really important that this is an HCP strategy. So this really is about the wider determinants and the real focus on inequalities and, as I say, building on the Marmot work altogether fairer. So it's really important that that actually sets the framework for the paper that Claire's going to talk about in a minute in terms of our 23-24 planning. It absolutely sort of sets the context for the Cheshire and Merseyside ICS going into the future years. So I'll probably leave it there, Raj, if that's okay. I do commend the interim strategy. I'm really pleased with it. It is long, appreciate that, but I think it's a really good example of partnership working. But there are a number of next steps outlined in section 4, but really that's about refining it, working on the prioritisation process, and then taking it through the HCP in March to really focus down on 1 or 2 priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Can I take any questions or comments?
Just a quick one.
Erica, then Paul.
Okay. It was just to say, I thought it was, sorry, was I first? And I heard my name. Sorry, just to say, Claire, I thought it was a really informative document. And my question was going to be, how many priorities are we going to get to? Because there is a lot of volume, so it was fantastic that you're kind of giving me in my head 2 to 3 priorities that everyone can really, you know, what will make Cheshire and Merseyside different. So it was good to know.
I think we're hoping that we'll have 2 or 3 that all of the 9 places can adopt, and then obviously flexibility for other priorities within place. But by having 2 or 3 across the whole of the 9 places and the HCP partners, that we begin to turn the dial. And I think, you know, as an ICB, hopefully we will look to invest some inequalities money into the HCP to support those priorities, and we'll look to partner organisations, maybe not to sort of match fund it financially, but what will they do differently? What's the sum of the parts? What difference will you make as a Cheshire and Merseyside HCP that we didn't do before the HCP came into existence?
Thank you. Paul?
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I think it's a really good piece of work that's been achieved in an incredibly ridiculous timescale. I think the government are asking the Health and Care Partnership to produce a strategy before it's properly even formed itself was absolutely ridiculous. So when I read it, I thought that's really good, and I think it does reflect an awful lot of the good work that that goes on. So I was really pleased with that. Obviously, it's very aspirational, isn't it? Saying we will, it's the how we will go about these things is the important thing. So very much support the thrust of it. And also in some areas where the very brief comment is made about a service area, that I'd like to see links to all the work that's going on around the sub-region to at some stage to see what efforts have been made to take various aspects forward. I mean, the Altogether Fairer board oversees the health inequalities stuff, but there are other particular aspects in here I'd want to see some more detail on in future, but it's a great starter for 10.
Thank you. I think what we'll try and do, because of the partnership members around the HCP, they come from a real variety of organisations, or partner organisations, so it's not just sort of health and care. You know, you've got education, you've got LEPs, you've got other organisations, so it's how we build and use the opportunities of bringing everyone together. And hopefully you'll recognise a lot of the priorities from your Health and Wellbeing Board strategy, but then the wider Liverpool City region, Cheshire and Warrington, LEP, and all those areas and fora. So there's a lot to do, but it is a 5-year strategy, so it is quite aspirational at the moment.
Yes, Sarah, and then Tony.
Yeah, just really welcoming the strong emphasis on tackling inequalities that's in there, and the emphasis on the marmot. That's so many partners have fed into this, which is great. We were particularly pleased as a group of 9 health watchers to be able to feed in and to make sure that the messages that the public are telling us about the pressures, their experience of the pressures, that is in there from the start. And just a final point that we've made in the HCP is, once it's a bit clearer what the exact focus is getting something short and sharp that the public can see to support the strategy, because not everybody's going to want to read a full strategy. But those points about kind of the commitment to equality, I think, needs to be really up there and visible for the public.
Thank you. Tony?
Thanks. Very excellent read, as Paul was mentioning there. The part that attracted my attention most was page 236 of the pack, the reference to prevention. And I think this pledge on prevention is something that does strike a chord. The NHS has talked about prevention for many years and has very often failed to deliver it. So this is probably one of the most ambitious parts of it, to change the demand placed on services by tackling the impact it has on people's health in the first place. So I really appreciate that focus on reduction of preventable risk factors, developing workforce, increasing social value. All of those are very challenging areas, and I just would commend you for putting it in there, because this could be one of the biggest pieces of work we could undertake over the next few years that would underpin everything that we're trying to improve. So a very bold step indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Rowan?
I think to some extent, Tony, you've beaten me to it. We've heard so much in this board meeting, the pressures at the front door of our hospitals, trying to get patients then back to social care settings or home. The fact that we are getting into the headspace of changing that will present at the front door of healthcare is the most important thing, probably as a generation, that we can look to try and do. And at last, in a unique situation to do it through integrating this care. The fact that the Health and Care Partnership reaches now into social care is probably one of the most vital connections that the NHS can ever make. That's why many of us put our hands up to take these roles on, because this is exactly what we are here to deliver. Ambition will always be followed with the determination to make that work, and some unique levers now, particularly our digital work that underpins our ability to find those patients or parts of our population most in need. So purely from my medical perspective, to hugely endorse this. It's the right thing for all we serve. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Rowan. Joe?
Thank you, Chair. Endorse all the comments. I think it's a great piece of work. It risks, doesn't it, the sort of boil in the ocean problem. So the prioritisation is really important. The focus on prevention, I think, is absolutely essential, but the long history of prevention is it promises a lot and hasn't always delivered a great deal. So to break it down into real clear evidence-based opportunities around primary, secondary and tertiary prevention, all of that evidence is there. Generally speaking, we've often not created incentives for prevention to take place. I think if you look back over the long history of health inequalities and prevention, we've said we'll do it, we've created targets and then measured different things. So I'd really encourage us to spend some time getting some near-term targets. It's really easy to talk about increasing life expectancy, but some of us won't be here by the time that happens. We'll be a statistic on the other side. But the real issue is, can we get some really short-term stuff around primary, secondary and tertiary prevention, which I think will grow faith that it's possible to do this in a relatively short time frame.
Thanks, Joe. Any
No,
responses?
I think
or?
it was just to say, obviously, we're asking the ICB to note the HCP interim strategy, but we are a member partner around the HCP, and I think it's really important as a board that we do note and support, endorse this, even as an interim. We will do further work to, you know, almost an exec strategy. We will prioritise, and I think it's important that we have the evidence base behind that prioritisation. But this is absolutely what we're about. This is absolutely what we need to do to sort of turn the dial going forward. And I think it's important that, you know, as Claire's going to talk in a minute, this is about the context and the framework for any future work we're going to do in this next 12 months. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. The board's strongly supporting and endorsing the strategy, and the emphasis I think I've heard today is about the prioritisation, the need for prioritisation and having an evidence-based approach to that. Thank you. Good stuff. Claire, agenda item 14.
Yes, thank you. So the paper sets out a summary of the NHS planning guidance that was issued at Christmas by NHS England, and as Claire has described, it provides a framework for us to develop two things over the next couple of months, which essentially will operationalise the strategy that Claire has just described. So the first is that we need, as a system, to produce 2-year operational and financial plans by the end of March. And secondly, we need to work together over that same time period and into June, finalising our 5-year joint forward plan, which basically sets the more detailed framework beneath our strategy. So the paper's got the information about the requirements there. We'll be looking to do extensive communication and engagement over this period, as set out in the paper, and we're further developing the plans for that. We will have formal sort of discussions and engagement with wider partners and health and wellbeing boards, starting now, but all the way through to publication of our joint forward plan at the end of June. The paper sets out the way that we're going to organise ourselves to do what is actually a considerable amount of work in a very short space of time across the system through a steering group and the other review and governance arrangements that we'll have to be mindful of as we move our plans through the approval processes before submission. And I'm asking today, well, obviously happy to take any questions, but today we're asking just to note the content of this report, which is effectively just an update on the guidance and our requirements. But this time when we meet next, there'll be lots more information about how those plans are actually coming together, particularly in terms of the financial and operational planning that and workforce planning that we're doing across the system. But one thing just to draw your attention to is that the day that we meet next as a board is the day that we're required to submit our first interim draft finance, operational and workforce plans to NHS England. So what we'll be doing is preparing those plans across the system. Individual provider finance boards will review those before submission. We'll do that through the executive team and through the provider collaboratives, but this board will meet the same day of submission, so it will be a ratification at this board meeting, just to note that. But obviously the final report, the final submission doesn't come until the end of March, so we will meet again then in March to approve the final plans.
Chair, and I know this is something that is a concern of yours, but you know, there is an element of this which is about us looking upwards and achieving compliance with the expectations of NHS England. But as this work concludes, it forms part of our composite annual plan. So not just the looking upwards targets, but the looking outwards and looking to our population and to looking to the health and wellbeing strategy, so it will become part of our annual plan for which this board will hold us to account.
Thank you. Thanks, Graham. Thanks, Claire. Are there any further questions or comments on this? So we'll get the first draft at next board meeting and then an opportunity to comment in detail for March. Okay, thank you. Let's go on to agenda item 15, Public and Patient Engagement Strategy.
Thank you. So, as a statutory organisation, NHS Cheshire and Merseyside has a legal duty to involve the public and is required to have a strategy for working with people and communities. The board paper I'm presenting today details the progress that we've made since it was signed off in July last year and sets out the next steps for translating the framework into an overall communications and engagement strategy for Cheshire and Merseyside and individual place plans and activity. So the draft engagement framework was received at the inaugural ICB meeting on the 1st of July and was part of the ICB's readiness to operate statement and requirements. So since July, a lot of further engagement work has taken place, including in place partnership boards and health and wellbeing boards. We've had positive feedback received about the approach we've used with Health Watch and the voluntary sector. So we'll take you to section 3, which is the next steps of the work we've done since the strategy document was introduced in July. I think one of the key areas I'd like to highlight is the Citizens Panel that was launched in October last year. This is an all-age Citizens Panel. So far we've recruited 621 panellists. We're developing a plan for further engagement with children and young people across schools and universities, but the Citizens Panel is all age. We've captured over 1,000 qualitative comments about services, and we've taken an initial recruitment survey. So there's an awful lot of work going on with the Citizens Panel, and we're really pleased with the engagement and the interest we've had from the public in that. There's a whole list of areas in terms of section 3 about work we've done since July. But I'd just like to move to 3.10 and 3.11, and I think maybe as part of the conversation we've had today in terms of the public voice and governance, and also wider engagement in all stages of the commissioning cycle, it is really, really important, and we all know this, that we hear the people, patients and the public's voice in all elements of our governance and commissioning cycle. So I think there are two elements that I think, using today as an example, I think we can build on that and make some really good progress and use sort of case studies to improve as an organisation how we work with that. I think we also need to develop more of our EDI agenda in this arena. So I think that's another area of work we'd want to do and take this forward. Whilst we are building from the bottom and working through our communities and through our places, I think it is important that we have a strategic approach to this and have a Cheshire and Merseyside level forum that can hold us to account and also influence our strategic priorities. So we will be looking to create that alongside the Citizens Panel, because I think it's different and complementary. And I think, Raj, you might have used the phrase parity of influence in terms of that forum. So it's something we're going to build into our planning for the new financial year. So I'd like to commend the report and the document to the board, and also to say any future updates will be through the Quality and Performance Committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Just make a comment. Today's board meeting is very ably by our colleagues in the audience have illustrated the importance and the significance of public engagement. So, Claire, I was really pleased to hear you say, I think I heard you say, we can reflect on what's happened today
absolutely.
And understand how we take the opportunity that our colleagues in the audience have presented in a way that's really meaningful to help the debate move on and decisions being made in an appropriate way.
Yeah, I think we all probably think we do it well, but I think we can do it better. And if we sort of formalise that and have a framework around that, I think we'll think that'll be better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Apologies, me again. Just to say that we were pleased to input into the creation of the framework last year, and we're just now really keen to see it implemented. We engaged some of our local communities to ask them for what they thought of the principles and to make sure that it's quite aspirational, but we've just got to make sure that we then turn those aspirations into reality and that people do know that the different routes that there are that they can get engaged with influencing, and also, as well as when we get to specific changes, that their experiences across the whole range of things do matter and are learnt from.
No, and thank you. We're really grateful for your support last year, and I know you're involved in another various pieces of work with us in terms of representing the public voice, so thank you for that.
And Claire, perhaps we could think about how we're going to measure the impact of this great work and the frameworks that have been developed and inform the board of that. Thank you. Okay, so unless there's any more comments, let's go to recommendations. Were to note the report, endorse further engagements around the framework and endorse regular reporting. People happy to do that? Yeah, thank you. Let's go on to the subcommittee reports, and given time, can we just take any critical points or headlines? Neil?
No, I think the report's hopefully clarified. It clarifies itself. Happy to take questions. There's just two recommendations there. That's to note the items covered in the last audit meeting and the recommendation regarding the approval of the ICB's operational sword.
Thank you, Neil. Any questions or comments for Neil? No, so we'll take the report as it is. Tony?
Thank you, Chair. The Remuneration Committee, just to explain briefly that we operated in two parts. 28th of November, we received a report on 3 areas of remuneration: the medical director, clinical leads and partner members. We were able to accept the recommendations for partner members, but requested further reports on the other 2 remuneration issues. That was received on the 10th of January and discussed largely by email, and subsequent to that we were able to approve the clinical leads remuneration, and the medical director's terms and conditions issues have been progressed by the executive.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions or comments? No, thank you. Tony again, quality.
Yeah, thanks again. Yeah, in section 4, it's important to note that we received an extremely good presentation from Associate Director of Performance and Planning about the urgent care system, and spent a lot of time discussing this in great detail. The conclusion was that it was very clear to us that managing the risks in just one part of the system was not going to be sufficient. It's likely to produce impacts elsewhere. So the outcome of that was that we really do need extensive and clear social care information. So we're expecting to receive that in the spring, probably around March, and then we'll return to the board with what we hope will be a full picture of the pressures within the system that include social care.
Really important, thank you. Any questions for Tony on quality and performance? Thank you. Erica, primary care.
Yeah, just one point, given the time, I think it's worth just confirming the closure of the practice that you will note that's in the report in Liverpool Place. It's just to make you all aware it was absolute last resort that the decision was made. There was no provider for the service following the tender process. It was an extremely compromised estate, without going into too much detail. I think it's just to reassure now that the focus is on the residents, providing them with an informed decision about their choices, and there are some significant choices for them. So it's just to confirm, the process that we went through to make that decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. Any questions or comments for Erica? No, thank you. And Claire?
So in terms of the recommendations from the Transformation Committee, this is the November meeting, so the digital and data strategy actually came to the board in November. We've developed the strategy. I think the other piece of work is around the review of the current transformation programmes, which we're going to be discussing at the Transformation Committee in March, and we'll bring recommendations here afterwards.
Thanks, Claire. Any questions, comments for Claire? Thanks for that report. Okay. I've not been notified of any other business, so just in terms of, it's an opportunity now, just in terms of closing remarks, I can't not comment on the engagement that we've had with the members of the public today. Hope you believe I am genuine in saying this. I know people may think differently. But people sat around this table are human beings. People sat around this table use the services of the NHS and the wider health and social care. And we have families who do that. And the majority of us are all in this area. We try and work to the best interests of the populations that we serve. That's our overriding motivation. And I think it's really, really important for us to think through how we better engage the public, because you made some really good points about engagement. And we've heard through Claire's report on public engagement how we can have that opportunity to do that. And we'll also reflect as a board. We've got an opportunity about how this board works and is perceived to be working better in terms of that question about listening to the members of the public. So I will give you that assurance that we will do that in a really strong way. Lots of things on the agenda as normal. The NHS and our social care colleagues are under tremendous pressure, but we can see some really good stuff happening. But I think the overriding thing for us is to continue as a board to express our support for the many, many tens of thousands of people out there trying to do a fantastic job to support the people of Cheshire and Merseyside. So, next meeting is the 23rd of February at Whiston Town Hall, Colliery Road. We look forward to that meeting. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.